Taking a wider lens on a story we've been covering, right now Donald Trump is on defense again over his approach to indicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. And it's not just over this apparent suicide. This is actually at least the third time that Trump finds himself under fire over Epstein. The prosecutor who gave Epstein that lenient deal was ousted from Trump's cabinet exactly 1 month ago. Footage of Trump's own past socializing with Epstein has leaked, which casts a shadow over their relationship. And now, yes, Donald Trump's DOJ faces allegations it mishandled Epstein as a prisoner, enabling the conditions for his suicide, while Trump has left those key vacancies at the Bureau. Now, as we just mentioned, that's a lot of Epstein problems for Donald Trump, and he's trying to deflect from this crisis by now spreading conspiracy theories about this apparent suicide, which, as I note, many believe Donald Trump's DOJ might have done more to help prevent. Now, on this newscast tonight, we're not going to show the tweets about those unfounded conspiracies. I'm not going to summarize them. I'm not even going to mention Donald Trump's targets, because that's precisely the goal of this kind of propaganda, to get the lies and innuendo somehow in the information stream, get people talking about it, get the lies repeated, even if for the purposes of fact-checking. You should know, however, that over 60 million online accounts have now been exposed to what Trump posted. And he may not be a student of history, but historians have tracked the dangers of this kind of propaganda featuring heated exaggeration and conspiratorial fantasy for a long time. The villains of the modern right are much more vivid than those of their paranoid predecessors, much better known because of mass media. I'm reading the words of historian Richard Hofstadter, who wrote that in 1964. Today, some of the symptoms are similar, maybe recognizable to you. The media, of course, is faster, more intense, and usually can't be turned off. Now, there is no equivalence between a sitting president's actions and those of random or less powerful citizens. But I also want to note tonight that some Trump critics are echoing his very tactic. They're taking to the internet, this was happening yesterday and today, with posts that accuse Trump of that same conspiracy theory, but trying to apply it to him. As the New York Times notes, it's a cycle of conspiracies showing how our information system is increasingly poisoned. I'm joined now by Gene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post. Good to see you, sir.
Good to be here, Ari.
I want to deal with this carefully, as I know a serious journalist like you does. So we're very careful about what we're mentioning and what we're diagnosing. Number one, what does it mean that the president jumps towards that deflection? And number two, without equivalence, but with observation, does it concern you that some of the president's fiercest critics then say, okay, well, I know you are, and throw it back at him?
Well, number one, this is a president, this is a person who has long been enamored of conspiracy theories, going way back to his time long before he got into politics, when he was just Donald Trump the character. He loved conspiracy theories, and is it appropriate for someone even seeking high office, let alone occupying the office of President of the United States, to get into this sort of thing? Of course not. Does Donald Trump care in the least what's appropriate? No. Does he want to deflect attention from the fact perhaps that Jeffrey Epstein was effectively in his custody and mistakes were made? Maybe he does. I don't know what his motive is, but that's deeply concerning. And it is also concerning that there would be sort of tit-for-tat conspiracy theories aimed at him. Conspiracy theories are 99.9% nuts to begin with. These are all made up out of whole cloth. There are investigations that have to take place and that should be taking place now. And so let's find out what happened and how it happened and why it happened.
And what do you think? I mean, as I mentioned, he may not be a master strategist. We don't have any reason to believe he's read Mr. Hofstadter's study of the paranoid style, but he certainly has a knack for it. I mean, as you say, you just put your finger on it, Gene.
Yeah.
It is Donald Trump and Bill Barr that left the vacancies open, that cut the funding, that were on notice that the person in their custody was a suicide risk, as we were just covering, and they're the ones with egg on their face, and he doesn't even think, he doesn't hold a strategy meeting, he knows immediately to try to get at least his base, and as we mentioned, some of his loudest critics basically stirring in the same pot, getting away from the fact. The fact is they are in charge of this prisoner, they own the mistake.
They own the mistake, right? And so for not just for the president to come out the way he did, but for Barr to say, well, I'm angry about this, and this, does anyone in this administration know how to say I'm sorry? Know how to express regret for an obvious mistake? This was a prisoner in your custody, and he apparently committed suicide. You say it's an apparent suicide, and that shouldn't have happened. So you should, I think, acknowledge that and acknowledge that this was a big screw up on the part of your department, and can no one in this administration be bothered to staff the federal bureaucracy at any level with competent people who see the holes in the system, who see deficiencies in the system, who are smart enough and experienced enough to know when you don't have, say, enough correctional guards on duty at the MCC, or when you have a management problem there, or whatever the problem happens to be.
You say that, Barr uses the word angry. That is an aggressive emotion. That would be something that you are angry at someone else for their actions, presumably.
Right.
The word that he should seek is ashamed, because it's his actions, it's his BOP, while he's been busy doing all these other things. I mean, he works weekends when he needs to write letter summaries. But who's working this past weekend, and why is the deputy position vacant, and why weren't they doing more? I mean, these are the serious questions.
Right. I was always taught that leadership involves taking responsibility for the bad as well as the good, and then pointing the way forward. But until you take responsibility, you really can't effectively lead. In my opinion.
Gene, I want to get you on one other thing before I let you go, which is a different topic. Today marks the 2-year anniversary, if we're going to call it that, of Charlottesville. And it comes after the horrors of last week. I think many of our viewers would just be curious, your thoughts as we reflect on this period.
Well, Charlottesville was a defining moment in this presidency, and unfortunately defined a whole lot of what's come afterwards. But one interesting thing now, as you look back, look at the anniversary 2 years ago, we are now at a point where major news organizations such as mine are just flat out describing many of the president's statements and actions as racist, just sort of not pulling punches. And it was not that it was pulling punches, it was just that we're not accustomed to using that language, not accustomed to drawing that conclusion. But the accretion of evidence and incident was such that it's unavoidable. And so this is now part of the discussion. And I think, 2 years after that seminal moment, I think that's a healthy thing. Let's call it what it is, and see if we can move on from here.
That's very interesting coming, from your credentials and your perch, and how that fits into what the policing is, how people think about what's been exposed in front of our own eyes, and how do we want to deal with it. Eugene Robinson, as always, great to see you. I appreciate your time, sir.
Great to be here, Ari.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.